All right, so let's turn our attention to a piece that you wrote with John Schwartz over at the Intercept. Wall Street's cooked books fueled the financial crisis in 2008. It's happening again, and this whole sector of commercial real estate for the past year, I've been hearing about problems in this sector. I mean, both like what you're outlining here is pure on fraud, and but there's also, like, I think other sort of issues in that marketplace. But let's talk about this because this is massive. Tell us how you started to pursue this fraud in what is the commercial real estate, I guess, loan market.
Right. I was contacted around a year ago, actually, by a CMBS analyst. This is commercial mortgage-backed security analyst who named John Flynn, he's public, he's on the record, he's in the story, said that he had spent several years in investigating these very specific loans, like basically looking at the actual documents that underlie these securities, trying to figure out how it was that these loans that when he used to work at a credit rating agency, he saw come across his desk and thought were sketchy 10 years ago. Now he's seeing them as an analyst come across his desk again, getting refinanced and at even better rates. And so he started wondering, how is this even possible? These were junk 10 years ago. They can't be any better now. And so he went about this incredibly difficult and laborious forensic accounting, trying to compare previous documents related to a particular mortgage for a commercial property with the current ones. And often he found that there appeared to be purposeful obfuscation to make it harder for people to find them. So, for instance, let me
stop. I just want to just go back a little bit before we get to the indications of fraud that he found.
Right.
So when you say, like, when he was working at this credit agency, what does that mean that these loans are junky? So there's, let's just use round numbers for the sake of those of us who are challenged by math. 100 loans are in there, and they are loans to a certain type of commercial property, right? Like, here's a building that's at the corner of, Maple and Fairview. They're like places where you have like small little like mini malls.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a building that is perfect for, let's say, like a Walgreens, or maybe a step down for that because it's not quite so busy. Like, and so the idea was that 10 years ago, this guy's looking at this whole sector and saying, like, this stuff is overinflated. The value of these loans are not so, the property is not so good relative to the amount that they borrowed. Is that basically it?
Right. Because he'd have a kind of broad view of what a certain square footage ought to be bringing in on a cash flow basis, and what the rents ought to be, what the interest rate ought to be. And he would just see some that were a little bit off. And they were all off in the same direction, benefiting the bank pretty much. And so, he kind of pocketed that away, and then saw these same loans starting to come around again.
And by coming around again, like, were they coming around again as securities, or were they just like he's seeing that they're being refinanced at lower rates, which means that presumably the bank has less risk, right? If I give you a loan at a low rate, it's less risk. But these things couldn't have gotten any less riskier. They could have only probably gotten riskier.
Right. And so they're coming around as pieces of mortgage-backed securities. So when pension funds or others, trade these giant packages of securities, what they're actually trading are individual properties, kind of sliced up and moved around. But underneath all of that is supposed to be something physical, a Walgreens at the corner of Maple and Walnut. But it's so difficult to pierce all the different layers to get down and say, let's actually check this Walgreens out. Is this Walgreens actually making the amount of money that it says it is? And what I was saying earlier, the way that they would obfuscate it is it used to be called, let's say, the Walgreens building. Now it's called the Greenwall building or the Maple building, or and because they own entire blocks often, that block has a bunch of different addresses. So the previous address would be 22 Walnut. Now they're putting it under 26 Walnut so that you can't easily search through these proprietary platforms that he has access to say, well, show me all the previous documents for 26 Walnut. And it'd be like, oh, there are none. So he just had to like one by one. All right, let me check 28 Walnut. Let me check 26 Walnut, check 22 Walnut. And then finally he'd find one that says, oh, this is the same square footage as the one that was listed under a different name and a different address. Now let me compare these numbers. And boom, lo and behold, every time he'd find that obfuscation, he'd find that the numbers were inflated by something like 30%.
Now, by inflated numbers, so I think everybody understands the concept of like, oh, okay, I've changed the way that I list this so that it's very difficult to compare these two things. You can't put them on a spreadsheet because they're different names. You can't search for it computer-wise. You have to literally just like sleuth it out that way. What does that mean by the numbers are inflated? Like their revenue is inflated?
Mm-hmm.
Is basically it?
Yeah, basically. So the same way that, in the Big Short, they were having bartenders, say that they were making $300,000 a year. And this time they would say this Walgreens made, $300,000 a month in 2016 under the former documents. Now it says they're making $400,000 a month that same year. It's not like they from one year to another like had a big increase, but he was able to get the same year's numbers and compare them. Be like, oh, these are off. These are not right. And if it's just a mistake, you'd expect it to go both ways. Sometimes they're accidentally reporting lower. Sometimes they're accidentally reporting higher. He found that almost always they were reporting higher.
Okay. All right. So we need to back up a little bit because I know what you mean when you say the bartender story, but this goes back to 2008. And one of the reasons why we had this massive financial crisis started with people going in. They were getting what were called ninja loans, which is basically no paperwork. We don't have to verify anything. And I'm a loan officer. I'm just originating the loan because I know that this loan is going to get sold to someone else. So I say to you, bartender Ryan, like, dude, I know you make 50, but guess what? You can put down, you make 150.
And the industry term for it became stated loan. And as I was involved in one of these once, the guy a broker came to me, he's like, we could do a stated loan. I was like, what's a stated loan? He said, well, you just state your income. Just state it. And the other name was liar loan.
Right.
But he's a broker. So he's like, well, of course you're not lying. I believe you when you tell me you make $300,000, but please do not give me any paperwork.
Right. Because then I will be obligated to know. And the reason why he doesn't
sully my commission.
Right. Well, that's that guy has a fiduciary responsibility. I mean, at banks, they're called loan officers, right? Like, I mean, that's because you're supposed to project a certain fiduciary responsibility. And if I know that you're not eligible for the loan, I can't make my fees. I don't care if the loan has a high propensity to go bad because I'm selling the loan to somebody else. I'm out of this transaction once I sell it. And so that's what happened. That was a big part of what happened with the financial crisis in 2008, because everybody bought these packages of loans from bartenders or whomever it is. And they think like, oh, look, these are solid loans. And this guy's making $300,000 a year. He can pay off this mortgage, but it turns out he's not. And when the music stopped and the prices for real estate stopped going up, when he went to go sell that house, he couldn't sell it. And he couldn't sell it except for at a loss. And then everything falls apart. And that is the dynamic that we have here that you're describing in the commercial market. And so how prevalent was this going back and lying about what the revenue is for these loans to make these loans look more robust than they actually are?
So one thing that backs up Flynn, who's the whistleblower here, is that two University of Texas researchers dug into this as well and put out a recent study and found it just absolutely rampant. That's not an academic term, but they found it everywhere, and they found roughly the same patterns and numbers holding across the CMBS industry as Flynn did in the ones that he looked at. So it appears to be affecting what they're finding a third to more of the loans.
A third of all the commercial loans in the country are not what the investors think they are, essentially.
That's what the research and Flynn's findings strongly suggest. Yeah.
And how thinly are they dicing up these loans in these packages that they're basically, allegedly misleading investors with? Because like there are, dozens in these packages, correct?
Right. The packages can run into the billions, because you have so much money flowing around, partly thanks to the Federal Reserve, that it's looking for these types of investments. For pension funds and others are looking for these types of investments to park money in, and so they'll package these into multi-billion-dollar investments that a teacher's pension fund can then purchase, and then they get their and everybody's happy as long as they're getting their coupon every month. They're getting their interest rate, and they feel like they can sell it at roughly the same or higher rate than they got it before. Widespread fraud in general, benefits all of the different players who are involved until the music stops, and then it hurts. It hurts all of them, though it hurts the ones with power the least, because they're the ones that can go out and get the bailout. And also, in the meantime, people who are not engaging in fraud are harmed along the way, like a mom and pop who doesn't have access to this type of a scheme to get say a lower rent by inflating your cash flow.
Okay, and so there's two things I want to touch on. One is the music stopping. Let's put it this way: how slow was the music prior to COVID? And I think, anybody who lives, around the world, a lot of people not going into work, and haven't been, and many won't be returning, at least to those same type of facilities. So the commercial real estate business is hurting big time. How quiet was the music getting, prior to March 2020?
Parts of it were certainly getting quiet as Amazon was taking over the country, and so you're seeing malls and other stores begin to empty out. It's becoming much more difficult for brick and mortar stores to compete with online. So you were seeing that the economy was still growing, which helps keep the music playing. And COVID, in a way, cut both ways, because so much money came through the CARES Act and then the subsequent COVID relief package, and then this new one, that those are multiple bailouts, that are multiple times the size of the Wall Street bailout. And you add on top of that the Federal Reserve saying that it was going to backstop a lot of this stuff. So we don't exactly know how this is going to play out. There's certainly a scenario where a lot of people just get away with this and sell all of this fraudulent stuff to the Federal Reserve at some through some different mechanism.
There's no mechanism set up to do that now, right? I mean,
they are buying MBS. They are buying CMBS.
Oh, they are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this was part of the original CARES Act, the $500 billion that Treasury had to backstop the Fed going out and basically backstopping.
My recollection is the Fed actually did it on their own without legislative authority, saying that this was part of their emergency powers to buy, that they could expand from residential MBS to commercial MBS.
When I hear that, it makes me feel like they've had this problem, because I heard about this at this time last year, a month this, and so it was clearly pre-existing, and it was all just rumors, and it was all just there's apparently a very small facility that deals with this type of stuff. And
it's dangerous because it interacts with commercial paper and overnight loans and liquidity, and so that's where the Fed starts to get extra concerned, that if you have a kind of liquidity freeze overnight, you could start to see it's just spiraling seizures in a bunch of different institutions.
And we had an incident like that a year and a half ago, where the Fed stepped in and basically
right.
loan market. So is this a situation where the Fed was aware of this problem and they see this crisis and they're like, we're not going to get much scrutiny if we bail this out. We're going to roll this problem into the COVID problem, and that's going to help us out.
I think that's certainly part of it. It's not entirely clear how much they know about the details of this. I think since that University of Texas report backed up Flynn's findings, I think that they have to be much more aware of it now. But I think you're right that they saw COVID as both a crisis and an opportunity.
One of the problems, I think the biggest problem that we had in terms of the economy in 2008 was a function of how systemic this leveraging was with these loans. In other words, you had commercial banks and investment banks sort of commingled in such a way that if one of these banks went down, it was going to have a ripple effect through the economy, to the point where, like, I knew somebody who worked in consumer consumer debt at one of these banks, and they had basically told their spouse, take every dollar you get out of the bank, and how it's one thing for the commercial real estate market to crater, right? But what are the ripple effects? Like, how many derivatives down the road are there in this market?
I mean, endless. It's all still interconnected. The hope that for avoiding the type of calamity you're talking about, when from Wall Street executives, is that the Fed just won't allow it to happen. And so, when they have, too big to fail. And so, when you have that comfort level, it does kind of disincentivize you from looking too closely at what's going on in the market. So it's going to be fine.
So some of the originators that are listed that they found were sort of inflating the revenue of these properties. UBS, Ladder Capital, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, having more than 35% of their loans exhibiting 5% or greater income overstatement. Just to be clear, what this means is, like, the guy had two sets of papers. Set A had all the revenue for the year 2018 of, those places at Walnut and Main Street. And set B had the same revenue, same places, but the revenue was just higher in that same year. This is just lying. And so, are there regulators? Like, is there somebody at the, I don't know what agency it would be. You tell me. Is there somebody at the Fed or at the SEC or both saying, like, hey, wait a second, maybe that's something we should check in, or maybe we should just pretend like we got the Intercept as a block site at our computers.
Right. And so, as I said earlier, because the fraud benefits so many of the people involved in this, there aren't a lot of people who are incentivized to look after it. But the one person who is incentivized is a whistleblower. There are whistleblower laws that if you bring to the SEC significant fraud that they can prove, you get a massive chunk of that. I forget exactly what it is. It's somewhere between 10 and 30%.
Yes, it's a PTAM case. It's
right.
There are laws that incentivize whistleblowers to see when the U.S. government laws are being broken in that way.
So when I said Flynn engaged in this extremely laborious process, it's not because he's just a total either crank or imbued with nobility on behalf of retailers across the country. If he has filed his complaint with the SEC, and if the SEC does find that it has merit and pursues these cases, then he stands to profit from it. So the answer to your question is the SEC, and I guess that would be Gary Gensler now that he's on his way through. So there is a real possibility that this gets investigated seriously.
What is the role or lack of ratings agencies in the commercial real estate? I'm not aware, because they played such an integral role in the last financial collapse.
A very similar role, and this shows that you can only rely on them. I mean, you can't really rely on them if you want a kind of forensic look at the paperwork that is underlying these securities that are being marketed. They're not really set up to do the kind of work that he did. The prospectuses alone on these things are like close to 500 pages, and that's before you've looked at the actual documents. And like I said, they don't make the documents remotely easy to analyze. So no, the credit rating agencies are basically looking at the prospectuses and saying that if this is true, what the prospectus is saying, then this is legitimate. If you want somebody who's going to do that, then then they're a fine person to check out. But they're not somebody who's going to say that the prospectus is necessarily true or not.
This is to extend that analogy with the bartender. Everybody is going on the stated
right
formula here. Well, they said it, so
right. We looked at the paper. It says 300,000.
This is just a series
Stamp it.
You have CYAs all the way through the system. So, all right. So that story's out there. It'll be interesting to see what Gensler does, because I would say of any of the people that the Biden administration could have put in that position, Gensler, based upon his last go through, might be inclined to actually pursue. What else did you find about this market? I mean, I and I don't want to steal the thunder for whatever future pieces that you're going to be writing, but broadly speaking, in this market, were there other sort of systemic issues that you came across? You've been reporting this out for months and months and months. Were there other systemic issues within that market?
There is a kind of big versus little divergence that came out of it, just from looking through all these different numbers. So, for instance, these major banks work with a lot of these major retailers as their huge clients, and so we write a lot about Ladder Capital and Dollar General as one of our main examples. And so you have to imagine that there is a Dollar General vice president and a Ladder Capital vice president who have regular meetings. Ladder owns something like 91 properties, or did a couple of years ago, probably more now, 91 properties that have Dollar Generals in them. So they're doing bulk business together. And so even aside from all of this, the paperwork shenanigans that we uncovered, just the act of this major bank doing business with this many Dollar Generals is going to benefit Dollar General in the sense that they're going to be able to shake a slightly lower rent out of these banks. Rent is is generally the number one cost for a brick and mortar small business. And so Dollar General's ability to undercut other businesses in the area on pricing is benefited by them being so big and having these good relationships with these global financial institutions. Whereas a mom and pop who's trying to compete with them, they're just going to either the local bank or a major bank and showing them their paperwork and getting whatever loan the bank will give them. And so then they have to charge a bit more for their products, and ultimately they're going to lose that fight.
If I understand you, Ladder has this bulk relationship with Dollar General. We're going to give you these massive loans. We're okay with your numbers.
Although it's not even clear Dollar General even knows that what's going on the
other side.
On the other side.
Okay, but because Ladder turns around, they sell the loans, so that's the way they're making their money, and so they're going to give Dollar General Dollar General better rates, but it doesn't matter because they're going to sell those securities, and they're going to make it up on that end, and so nobody's the wiser. Again, I mean that's the beauty, horror of this is that everybody's making money until we, as a society, have to bail them out, and that's the big problem. Ryan, great job here on this reporting. The story is Wall Street's cookbooks fueled the financial crisis in 2008. It's happening again. Thank you so much for joining us. Your kids definitely did seem excited that you were on.
Yes, they sure were. They're big fans of the show.
Yes, I'm glad to hear that. All right, Ryan Grimm, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks,
Really
Ryan.
appreciate it.
All right, see you later.